My name is Joshua Johnson, and I'm one of the assistant curators here at the Figge, and I'm so glad to welcome you here tonight, back in person, thank goodness. And I'm so thrilled to be celebrating this exhibition, and Lindberg, Think Like the River. As you know, we try to host some kind of free programming every Thursday evening here at the Figge. However, our next programmatic opportunity is this coming Sunday at 4 p.m. in this very auditorium, where we will share 3 independent films which are part of our ongoing Pride series during the month of June. The following Sunday, June 19th, we will be screening God's Own Country as part of that same series. Both of those films and all of our Thursday night programming are free to our visitors, and all of our Thursday night programming is provided by the sponsorship of Chris and Mary Rayburn. While we are showing our gratitude, we also need to thank our wonderful sponsors for this exhibition: Humanities Iowa, Modern Woodmen of America, and the Carolyn Levine and Leonard K. Leo Trust. Thank you so much for all of the Figge's generous sponsors. While these programs are free, I do encourage you to consider becoming a Figge member. Your support as a Figge member is vital to the museum now more than ever. Membership generates revenue needed to support exhibitions, educational programs, for adults and children, care of the collection, and so much more. For tonight's program, we very much welcome your questions and comments. We just ask that you save them until the end of the scheduled lecture. And we will be also bringing the microphone around so that everyone can hear the questions that are asked. Tonight, it is my very great pleasure to introduce artist Anne Lindberg and poet Ginny Threefoot, who collaborated on the installation that opens on the 4th floor this weekend, titled Think Like the River. And you will all, unbeknownst to you maybe, will be getting a sneak preview of the exhibition this evening after the conclusion of the lecture. So we invite you all to come upstairs after the lecture is over. The elevator will be unlocked. I'm realizing the stairwell will not be, so use the elevator, save your legs. Anne Lindberg's work has been exhibited widely throughout the United States and abroad, including the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Mattress Factory, the Museum of Arts and Design, the Joan Mitchell Kohler Art Center, and many others. Her work is included in the collections of the Nevada Museum of Art, the Detroit Institute of Art, the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, amongst many others. Lindberg earned her MFA from the Cranbrook Academy of Art and a BFA from Miami University. She now lives and works in Akrondale, New York, but was raised nearby in Iowa City, as many of you know. Ginny Threefoot received her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and her work has appeared or is forthcoming in the Bennington Review, the Caliban, the Cincinnati Review, Cream City Review, Poet Lore, Poet Daily, and Zone 3. She has collaborated with Anne at Carrie Seeker's Gallery and Hawk Contemporary. Think Like the River is Anne and Ginny's 4th project together. Without any further ado or any more blathering from me, I'd like to turn things over to Anne.
What an extraordinary pleasure to be along the Mississippi with so many people I've known for, many of you for 60 years. Many of you are artists. It's an incredible pleasure to be in Iowa and near the town I grew up in, and my parents raised my brother and I in. My brother is here, and Ginny is a family member as well, and my niece is here, and many neighbors. It's incredibly touching. So I want to thank Josh, who has been my right-hand person for several days. He walked about 16 miles over the weekend, and is the tech person, the install person, the coffee run person, and a great friend now. So thank you so much. And thank you to Andrew and to Michelle and to Steve Banks and many others. So what you've been looking at, I'm going to start with some images that are sort of references, or what I like to call touchstones. This piece by Rebecca Horn is, to me, really telling. A vertical body on a horizontal plane with a horizontal line strapped to his head. That's a 20-foot 2x4 strapped to his head. And to me, that length of wood, is like a microscope illuminating the fact that when he makes the slightest tilt to his head, that line completely changes and shifts about maybe 30 degrees, 20 degrees, which I think is really amazing. The smallest movement of the body can bring shifts in understanding of place and meaning. And I do work that has these kinds of, maybe not as profound as Rebecca Horn from 1972, but I'm interested in the idea that the smallest of gesture can hold profound meaning. And of course, there's the horizontal, the vertical, and the depth expressed there with that marking in the ground. So it's a three-dimensional expression. And I love the humor of it, actually, also. So a couple of other things I'm going to show you. Just 4 images that are sort of things I return to often, and they do express a few things about my history. So the regal gentleman on your left is a Tuareg chief from Mali. And this image to me embodies this notion of color and place. So he is wearing about 150 yards of fine cotton, like a gauze fabric that's been impregnated with indigo, which is grown in Mali. And it's like a very, very long line that becomes a dot in a way, or a solid. And I think it's quite extraordinary to think about that length of space is embodied on his head. He's a chief, it's a sign of his place and his culture. And you can see that his skin has also been turned blue by the indigo. So these people are known as the blue men of the Sahara. And I was an intern at the Smithsonian and in the Department of Anthropology and the Museum of Natural History following college before I went to graduate school, when I thought I wanted to study anthropology and ethnology and work in museums, quite frankly. But I quickly learned when I didn't meet this gentleman, but when I experienced objects from his culture, that I wanted to make things. So the image to the right is of Via Selman's Mezzotinte. So this is a contemporary Latvian artist. She's known for making these quite extraordinary images of webs, water. She's made images of guns, rocks. She's reproduced envelopes. And she's sort of interested in this idea that the hyper real can slip into abstraction pretty quickly. And I just think it's a beautiful, silvery, watery image that embodies what it looks like to see a spider web, a sort of surprise. And it's a slow, mezzotints are made with a sort of slow accumulation of marking, which is something that I do, 16 miles worth over the last weekend. So these 2 amazing women embody ideas of line and place, and they were actually friends in the 1950s. This is Lenore Tawney and Agnes Martin. Most of you might know Agnes Martin, but many of you might not know Lenore Tawney. She's getting her due of late. She was a weaver, and it's really interesting to me that this minimalist painter and this weaver were good friends in New York City in the 1950s. So Lenore was really a revolutionary person in the field of textiles. She sort of, in a way, she broke open the structure of weaving and examined it, pulled it apart, and understood it as lines as opposed to structure. I mean, certainly there is structure, but she understood it as a drawing space. And this is a perfect image of that idea. It's lyrical, it's beautiful. She was quite a private person and really a very powerful artist. And then Agnes Martin is, renowned for her paintings of light and her understanding of stillness and persistence and perseverance. She is really a model for me for how to work. She chose a maybe more extreme life than I have, but she used this sort of idea that you only include in the work what really needs to be there. So art making to her was a process of extraction as opposed to addition. She take things out to find meaning rather than add things in, which I find compelling. And the other thing I just want to say is I'm showing you the people, not the work, purposefully, because it's really the people, these 2 individuals, and the way they practice, the way they work, the way they conducted their studio, that I find compelling, although their work is also quite extraordinary. So Via Selman's made this 8-foot long reproduction of a pencil. It's, the number 2 pencil is ubiquitous. We all expect to open the kitchen drawer and find one. We don't know that we put it there, but we expect to find it when we open the drawer. And I use the pencil. It's sort of an object that we take for granted. So this is my studio table as of the last couple of years. I have thousands of pencils and I go through a lot of them. And I'm now sorting them by color. This was in a stage when I wasn't sorting them. I've now found that I have to sort of make the rainbow on the table and know where the blue ones are. But it's perhaps the most basic of artist tools. And I like that fact, that it's a sort of humble tool. So for about 20 years or longer, I've been making drawings with pencils. And this is a detail, a very early piece. And you'll find that I make a lot of straight lines. I work with a parallel bar, which is an architect's tool. And to me, this way of making fields of marks is a record of time. I'm building a field, I'm building a place in a way. It's diaristic in that you can see some blips and changes in the marking that's evidence of its handmadeness. So this was an early drawing where I realized that if I changed the pressure of my hand as I drew, I could achieve tone. And it's almost like a photograph. It's like the pixels of a photo, I shouldn't say pixels, the dots of a photograph or the pixels of a photograph. So for all of its handmadeness, it also has a kind of digital, like it's a record of time, like machines like EKGs or machines that record waves. It has that element, that mechanized systemic presence, but obviously it's quite handmade. So I have an architect's parallel bar that's 10 feet long. It was built by Eldorado Architects in Kansas City. They heard me say, I wish I could find a parallel bar longer than 60 inches, which is the sort of wingspan of the hand of our bodies. So bars were made 60 inches long for practical reasons. And they heard me say, I wish I could find a longer one. So they proposed to make this drawing board for me. It's known as the articulated Lindberg extender, the ALE, which is also beer, which is a bunch of guys. So I've really become one with this tool. It was very awkward at first. The bar is heavy and I have to walk as I'm drawing, which has become something I embrace because I want to be able to make a 9-foot wide drawing. So you can see I'm standing on a platform so I can get to the top of that particular drawing. But I'm really interested in this idea of walking. So what it's enabled me to do, and this is work made of a couple of years after I got the bar, has enabled me to make drawings of some scale. So I'm sort of pushing the definitions of how big drawings are. There are other artists making big drawings, but by and large, most drawings tend to be more easel sized. So these are a little more than 7 feet. The last one you were looking at was 9 feet. So I draw in a horizontal position, as you can see here, but I found for a period of time, I was primarily presenting them in a vertical position. They have a sort of charge, an electrical charge. When the line is related to the body, it's standing, so it's live. And this was from a series of works where they were sort of images of breathing, this sort of notion that it swells and it recedes and it swells and it recedes. And I began to introduce color into the work. And this is another sort of method that's quite a bit related to the drawing upstairs in the gallery, although the drawing upstairs, the lines are in a horizontal position, but I've also introduced color in a more graphic way to sort of shift the rhythm. So the watery, sort of lyrical, moody quality of the graphite layer is there, and then it's been charged and sort of interjected with something that's more like percussive, you could say, and has a sort of measured rhythm. So these are pieces from maybe about 4 years ago. So I went to a residency. I'm sort of showing the work, like a group of drawings, which is just shown to you. Now I'm going to introduce the immersive thread installations that I make, and then I'm going to return to the drawings, and then I'm going to speak with Ginny. But this work at the Nerman Museum was the first large thread installation that I made. I went to a residency in upstate New York, very near, about 20 minutes from where I now live. I fell in love with the landscape, where I experimented with drawing in space. So taking that fine pencil line and using thread, I actually hightailed it up to Albany to a fabric store to buy thread and returned back to make a very crude experiment of what happens when you put thread into space. How does it catch light? And I was responding to a light condition in this barn studio that I was working in, and came home and sort of engineered it, like figured out like what weight of thread, what type of attachment, how long could I pull it, how much thread was needed to sort of achieve the body of the sort of glowing color that I was after. And the director of this museum I met at Cranbrook, and he now lives in New Mexico, Bruce Hartman, said, let's go for it, Anne. Let's have you build a big piece and see what happens. So this is what I built. It's a 14-foot wide piece. It's 7 feet tall and 7 feet deep. And it sort of became this field, this yellow room. We basically turned the room yellow. It's a quite small room. It's not a very big room. And it filled the room. It was like salt from the back coming forward. And I became really interested in the body's response to it. It sort of flipped into something physiological, out of the graphic picture plane space into physical space. It became more of the body, and the color became the place, or the place became the color, in a way that I found compelling. And of course, it's sort of an image of light. But what was really interesting, I'm married to a lighting designer. So Derek's understanding of the optics of light and how our eyes respond helped me realize that when you entered the room from a daylit sort of blue atrium, which is expressed in the one photograph, the room looked really yellow. It looked like there was yellow light turned on in it. But once you got into the room and your eyes equalized the color, as we all know from Albers, you look at the green square and you see red when you look to white. The sort of same idea, this blue daylight space exaggerated the yellow in the room. Once you got in the room, your eye equalized and the walls turned white again, and you looked out and the atrium looked like it had, like purple, blue light on. So this kind of way in which the work changed your body, changed your body's response to space and to light, and to this sort of material that's sort of immaterial. So with that idea, I'm going to read a passage from John Berger's very interesting illustrated book. It's a correspondence between John Berger, who is no longer living, an incredible critic, one of my main people to turn to, fiction writer, poet, critic, theorist, and his friend John Christie, who was a filmmaker and artist. So bear with me, I'm just gonna read this. Is honey the living equivalent of gold? Supposing one tried to give temperatures to colors. In a sense, we do it all the time when talking about warm and cool tones. A certain red is 98 degrees Celsius, ultramarine is 7. Cobalt blue is -10 degrees Celsius. Maybe yellow is the one color that is body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius. And so the ancient Egyptians believed it was the color of immortality. You are struck by the fact that yellow is never regular, it's varied. As you say, it stores and reflects light, but it receives and gives off waves which are not constant, as though its surface is liquid rather than solid. And its irregularity reminds us of a living skin, of a body. So that's Berger writing to Christie. So to switch things up, in 2011, I had an incredible opportunity to spend 4 weeks above the Arctic Circle in Norway at the autumnal equinox, actually, so the lightest time of year. In Svolvær on the Lofoten Islands. And it had an incredible effect on my understanding of color. As you might imagine, Lindberg, have some Scandinavian roots, and so I felt close to home there. It's an archipelago in the North Sea, and it's a fishing village. It's also a place where the Hurtigruten, or whatever that Norwegian cruise ship is called, it visits. So it's infused with tourists for an hour, twice a week. It was an incredibly stunning landscape with black rock jutting out of the sea and a kind of silvery graphite landscape that I was transfixed by. And just a few steps away from the studio I had was this fishing net repair facility. So this is, of course, not the most environmental way to fish, but it is the way this community has fished for years. These are nylon nets that are being piled up along the harbor shore, and they're brought into this facility. I think the color is just profoundly amazing. And you can see how long in the far left or far right upper image. It's a massive net. So that facility is maybe, I don't know, quite long, 100 yards long. So they're actually repairing them with these small plastic tools by hand at tables. But just seeing this mass of textile material gathered up in these brilliant colors just caused me to return home with a greater confidence about color and place. New Year's Eve, 2011. Finished the morning of January 1st, 2012. So when I say color and place, at the Bemis Center, some of you may have been to the Bemis Center in Omaha. It's one of the first art centers in the country, and it has incredibly daring and interesting programming. It's had some pretty great leadership and curatorial voice. It's a super interesting building and an interesting part of Omaha. And so I decided to make this hot pink piece. It seemed to sort of make sense with the place and the community. It was better known as Hot Lips. The piece was called Drawn Pink, but my husband called it Hot Lips because it was sort of a lipstick color. But it was interesting. It was a sort of asymmetric piece that filled this corner. It was in a group show called Placemakers. And you can see this is the person who did the time lapse actually. It turned the room pink. You can see the cast on his face. And I learned some things when we took it down. I learned some things about color, about the compression of the color when it's in the spool form in the box, and then here when it's cut. I called this fallen drawing. So it's a collapsing of the color, and you can see the imbued, you can see the tension in that line just back of my feet there. The tautness of the line is revealed when it was cut. So it fell with a sort of straight line. So there's a lot of tension in these pieces. And with that, you can see in the upper right, I pulled the sheetrock off the wall once. But these are just images of the process. It's tedious and it's interesting and thrilling and exciting. Sometimes you have a shoulder harness on you that's like this big heavy chain on your back because you're over three flights of stairs in Boston. So there's some interesting things that have happened and the process has gotten more smooth. But Josh and Derek and I did this for a few days here at the Figge. So I moved to the Hudson Valley in New York State, north of New York City in 2015 from Kansas City, where I lived for almost 30 years. And I had an incredible opportunity to make a piece at Thomas Cole's home and studio. This is the Thomas Cole National Historic Site. And they allowed me to staple, you can see we put up a panel because this is a historic home. So, and the walls here had just been restored. This is the periwinkle color that Cole used on the second floor of his home adjacent to his office. And it was a group show about his relationship to color. So the great Hudson River School painters really did capture the quality of color in the Hudson Valley. The sky in the area where I live really is that amber, gold, yellow, orange very often, quite different than the sort of crystalline overhead quality of the light in the Midwest. I often feel that when I'm traveling across the country, sort of midway on the eastern part of Pennsylvania, you begin to feel the quality of Midwestern light that's clean and crystalline, very sort of sparkly and overhead. So I made this piece adjacent to the window. This gives you a little sense of how they're made. At the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh, which is also a super interesting institution. It's been supporting site-specific installations since the 1970s when Barbara purchased a former mattress factory. They now have several locations, and this is their Monterey Street location, which is a turn of the century row house. So this was probably a bedroom or drawing room at the front of the home. And so this piece is called Shift Lens. It's sort of like thinking of the room as the inside of a camera, this sort of the windows as a lens. And obviously you can see it changed as the light changed. A very intimate piece. They allowed me to staple into the floor, which was a real thrill. Can't do that very many places. So the windows sort of went from obscurity to visibility depending upon the light conditions. And this is a work I made in Cincinnati in the Contemporary Art Museum there that was designed by Zaha Hadid. And so I've really sort of made an image of illuminated light. There isn't a skylight up there. The thread is producing that quality of color. And the thread actually touched that rough cast concrete column. So it was this kind of dynamic between delicate and rough. It's a building with very few right angles. It's quite profound building, actually. So this is a very, very recent piece that I made. This was also a show that was postponed due to the pandemic. I was actually prepared to go about a month after the March of 2020 that we all know. The Everson Museum in Syracuse was designed by I.M. Pei. This was his first museum project in the US, and the edition in Des Moines followed shortly thereafter. So this piece is called Bloodlines. It was a pretty interesting exhibition about the dialogue between, or work being made in the field of textiles and fiber that address abstraction. So there were quite a number of interesting artists in this exhibition. So I made this blood red sort of emotional piece. I think it's really a COVID expression of color. And also the primary color seemed true to Pei, and the way in which he actually selected the paintings for the lobby of this space. So you could get fully under this piece. And here's a detail and a view to show this amazing spiral stair in the second floor of his building. It's quite a profoundly beautiful building. It's a hulk of a building, I'll say. Quite nice. So I'm just going to show a handful of drawings and then I'm getting to Ginny soon. These are a couple of very, very recent drawings to continue the discussion of color. I think during this challenging time in our lives with climate change and the pandemic and gun violence and many other things, I've found myself wanting to work with really hot color, like pay attention people, wake up, this sort of intensity of color. So I've made a whole huge body of work called flash drawings. And these are a couple of these are called rising temperatures, but primarily I call them flash drawings or vivid messengers, as Ginny likes to know. And then I've also been making these apparition images, these kind of ghostly absences, or perhaps presences. They're sort of sunlit or baked or overlit, bleached, ghostly forms. So I think it's sort of interesting to understand what artists are making during this time. And these are two things, they're quite different, one quite sensitive and one quite different. So now I'm going back a little bit in time, turn to the work that I've done with Ginny Threefoot. And this is one of the first ways we worked together. It wasn't a full collaboration, but I'll show you how her work entered into this project. This is a project called Walking as I Stand that was in Chicago in 2018. And I made 6 large drawings presented vertically and then made this 50-foot long line of wood that served as a seat. So walking as I stand and sit. So I guess I have another video here to show you the making of one of the drawings, and listen to the soundtrack carefully. So I selected that music from Nils Fromm, a German contemporary pianist composer, because the scratches of the recording seem analogous to the scratches in a way, and blips and missharpenings and breakings of the pencil and so on that are in the drawings, which you'll be able to see in a little bit. Whoop. Okay, so there's the finished drawing. And as the concepts for the show developed, I was speaking with Ginny quite a bit. She and my brother were beginning to come to Ancramdale in the summer, and she was beginning, as I understand, to work on a poem called Axis. And this idea of walking as I stand and the vertical horizontal relationship of the wooden bench form as an axis in a way in the show led me to ask if her poem could be in the gallery. So it wasn't a collaboration in a true sense. It was an accompaniment to kind of adjacency. And the poem did change and evolve, I believe, as we realized it was going to be in the gallery. The axis being a kind of still point around which things move, which seemed appropriate to the exhibition. So then shortly after, I have no idea what time it is, by the way, shortly after the exhibition, including Ginny's poem, my interest in poetry and language deepened. And I realized that it's sort of another form of abstraction. It seemed to sort of give meaning to the work in a certain way and inform the work and help me understand what I was doing. So I made these tandem drawings, and I made each panel independently. You can see they're in half, not knowing which form would be matched with which form. So I made 8 or 10, 12 panels and then found its mate after they were done, and embraced and was quite interested in the match and mismatch of the forms, the sort of intense disjuncture. So again, it was a small little gallery in Kansas City, and I included a quotation from Virginia Woolf. So I'm going to read again. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to read this quotation. It's meaningful to Ginny as well. It is a mysterious fact that a word is not a single and separate entity, but part of other words. Indeed, it is not a word until it's part of a sentence. Words belong to each other, although, of course, only a great poet knows that the word incarnadine belongs to multitudinous seas. How can we combine old words with new order so that they survive, so that they can create beauty, they can tell the truth? That is the question. It is words that are to blame. They are the wildest, freest, most irresponsible, and most unteachable of all things. Of course, you can catch them and sort them and place them in alphabetical order in dictionaries, but words do not live in dictionaries. They live in the mind. If you want proof of this, consider how often in moments of emotion we most need words. We find none. Perhaps it is their most striking peculiarity, their need for change. So at this point, I'm going to walk over there and join my dear friend and great poet, Ginny Threefoot. We're going to speak about our first fully collaborative piece called Broken Riddle Piece that occurred in Kansas City in 2018. And it was a kind of real threading together of her poetry and drawing. So during this time, I was interested in breaking the traditional sort of on-center placement of work in gallery settings to sort of allow the drawings to bob up and down the wall. And I was also interested in work that changed scale, intensity, and so on. And Ginny, at the same time, in our conversation together, was developing an interest in fragmentation in her work. So here we are. So I need the advancer tool. Excuse me, a lot of technology. I have wires attached to me all over. So I think I go like this. Yeah.
Well, first
Yeah.
I want to thank Anne for inviting me to collaborate. Her work is magical, as you've been seeing, and it means so much to me personally, and working with her is such an expansive experience in every sense of the word. Literally, you will see up in the gallery, but I just want to thank you so much. And to talk about Ha, Anne was mentioning her desire to break the on-center line presentation of the drawings with the idea that it would create a more immersive experience. She's not just interested in that with the thread pieces, she wants all the work to do that. And I had a comparable interest in fragmenting the poetry to also create a more associative possibilities with the language. So in this case, I took several poems, all of which were concerned with our relationship to time, and took them apart, put them back in different order, and they were scattered, as you can see here, across the gallery. And the next one, yeah. So you could read the text in any way you wished. And that was nonlinear, achronistic in this language about time, and enables the viewer to be a co-creator in the work, so that our interest in collaboration and your use of the word immersive has to do with wanting the viewer to be in the work and to make the meaning, so, or help make the meaning, or a meaning. And this desire to have meaning arise in an associative way also was important to us in our choice of breaking the lines, because we didn't want the work to be seen in one-to-one correspondence. We didn't want one medium to limit or define the other one, especially the language, which tends to tell us what to think and what to see. So I think we successfully avoided that in this gallery. One line in Broken Riddle Piece asks, are we ever rendered perfect? And I think the answer in this exhibit and in our collaborations is no, there's no one single perfect rendering. There are many meanings, there's many ways of being. And that's what I think the Ha exhibit, I hope, accomplished.
Yeah, so one thing that was pretty great was Ginny came to my studio for 3 weeks, 4 weeks in the summer before this show, and she was fine-tuning the poetry and I was making the drawings. So we literally were in the same space as it was being made, and we had a sort of dollhouse mock-up on my table of placement, and arranged, rearranged, and sort of found the point at which it seemed to be open enough for presentation. So it's interesting to think about the left to right, our sort of left to right. That's embodied in us as we read, and we found that maybe somebody was attracted to the red drawing or that particular bit of text and would enter the work at that moment and then not follow the sort of left to right reading. So you can see there's quite a variety in terms of wandering. So our next collaboration happened, you can see 2020 there, in a time when no one was traveling. And this was a physical exhibition, but its public face was online. And it was at Carrie Seacrest Gallery in Chicago. The gallery decided to ask its artists to invite another artist to join them in the exhibition. And very, very many of us did not choose another visual artist, which I think is a really interesting response to the question. So there were poets, dancers, architects, musician, I believe. So Ginny and I'm going to let Ginny talk about this, but our project was called Solving for X, and I'll let you speak about how it's different than what we just showed.
Okay, yeah. Well, I had said that we wanted to avoid one-to-one correspondence, and I think that what Ha gave us some confidence about is that the drawing and the text could talk to each other rather than define each other. And so we embraced the opportunities of the one-to-one proximity. I wanted the poem to emulate the horizontal lines of Anne's drawings. And so, as you can see here, because it's so big, it's a series of 14 repeating formulas or equations that are solving for X. And it opens with the line, the secret number of fear is utterance. And it talks to the drawing as it goes down and the drawing gets deeper. The secret number of doubt is salt. The secret number of consolation is shadow. And then as you get to the resolution at the bottom of the drawing and it greens and brightens, the secret number of radiance is conversation.
So during 2020, the project at the Figge Museum was postponed. However, a lot of work had been done prior to that change, which, by the way, was quite fruitful for us, and we'll explain that. The Think Like the River project evolved. Ginny had been working on a group of poems, and we were considering a group of poems to be in the exhibition, being a part of it. And her poem Think Like the River kept rising to the top as a logical and clear choice for this collaboration. We, as was said, I grew up in Iowa City and Ginny grew up in New Orleans. And so each of us have a place on either end of this great river, and knowing that the Figge Museum is alongside the Mississippi River, and of course our awareness of the devastation of many, many floods, most notable at that moment in 2019, when, as I understand, there was water along the edge of the museum, and many other struggles in the area, obviously. And Ginny's witnessing of the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, it seemed really to make sense to use that poem as the sort of conceptual focus of the show. So what's in the show, and we'll go up in just a few minutes, we're going to say a few things about it, is this drawing, which is a multi-panel drawing, an immersive thread installation that fills the center of the gallery, and then a wall of poetry that is sort of a mirror of the drawing. So there are three components. And we had begun this conversation about the human's relationship to the environment and our sort of need to listen to the river and to ask the river what we can learn from it, to learn from the river.
So when I looked at the drawing as Anne was making it, I saw, if you see the horizontal stack of shorter bars on the far left, they reminded me of the water lines, the flood lines that I'd seen on houses after Katrina that marked how high the water had been. And when I look at other parts of the drawing, I saw barges, I saw driftwood, I saw the sense of floating things and surfaces and depths. And seeing that in the drawings, it made me think, okay, what can I do with the poem? What else can be done with the language? Which led to a new experiment with fragmentation. And I wanted to free these words about a poem about water and enable them to drift. And so they drifted and they reform and they spread across the wall. So when I said expansive, I mean expansive. And it seemed much truer to the work to do that. It also, like I was saying, and I'm really interested in, I'm so jealous of visual artists who don't have to mean, meaning doesn't, what it means to you when you look at a drawing and the expectations you bring to that are so different than when you look at a poem and you want it to make sense. So it's like, no, do not try to make poetry make sense. Let it happen on some other level, some other way. And so here you can read these words vertically, horizontally, even in a circular manner. And again, sort of it resists our impulse to think in a linear way. I think that the poem was not only inspired by Anne's work, but also guided by Anne's work, because you can see the stack of bars that I referred to earlier, and then how the text is a mirror.
This is a side-by-side presentation. This
isn't what the exhibit looks like.
This is a mock-up of a side-by-side relationship.
This is a portion of the drawing and a portion of the text.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can see how the text is reflecting the drawing here. Anne read that quote from Woolf that asks, how can we combine old words with new order so that they survive, so that they create beauty, so that they tell the truth. And working with Anne, collaborating with Anne really informs how I address that question, because in this exhibit in particular, with this poem in particular, the poem becomes, I think, truer to its intentions. If you can, yeah, so this is the poem as it was originally written, and it's a box, and it written in this box form, which is in tension with what the poem is exhorting the reader to do, which is to think outside of the box of human thinking. And so what happened to the poem was this, which, as I was saying, I think it's truer to the intention of the work. And it could only have happened in collaboration to be more fluid and changing and evolving.
Mhm. So we had this image, I made this image. This is an image of the drawing with all of the graphite removed. So you're only looking at the bars. So you can see how Ginny's work then is mimicking that idea. And so the drawing and the poem are facing each other in the gallery. And the thread installation is in the middle. And I just think it's sort of like a map or an X-ray of the structure of the project. So it might not be necessary to say too much more. I think we should go upstairs and have some question time. These are just these are just iPhone images. These are not professional images, but shows how you can see the poetry through and underneath the installation. This is the installation in the middle. And then you can see the drawing in the opposite direction. So we have one of the things to say about the poem is one of the last lines in the poem, if you call it that in this presentation, since it's been exploded open, the last line can be any line you pick, but one of the last lines in the poem is trade your language for an answer. And we have this sort of thought that the poem is sort of asking you some questions. It's prompting you to reconsider your relationship to place, to environment, to the river. And then you move through the river under the installation to the drawing, which is absent of language and maybe is back to the body in a certain way or back to the mind without the language. It's not the answer, because I don't think either of us believe there is an answer, but this sort of notion of language, body, and then the graphic of so the two coming together. You probably have much better words for that idea than I do.
I really like what you said about the body, because I think it is about leaving your language and being more embodied in the world.
Yeah.
So
we can turn the lights up and have some questions. We can get up and go upstairs, whatever you'd like.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it makes, I think we're all anxious to get to the gallery.
Yeah, sure.
Does it make sense if people want to just address you with questions?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Anne and Jenny, for that.
Absolutely.
Wonderful presentation.